Welcome, everyone. I'm just going to say just a short tech piece, just very quickly. I think most of us are pretty familiar with Zoom, but we'll keep you muted during the time that we're together, so that we'll have as clear as possible sound between Sarah and Susan here as they do this interview. And if you have questions, save them for the end. There may be some time at the very end for some questions. And if you have any tech issues or trouble hearing or anything, you can send me private messages and I'll help you out as I'm able to. That's it.
Thank you, Jaya. Did you put the title in the chat? How NVC discovered trauma healing. Is that right?
Yep, there it is again for you.
It is. Okay. How Nonviolent Communication discovered trauma healing, an interview with Susan Skye, my beloved friend and mentor. I'm so grateful that there are so many people who came tonight to be with us.
How you got muted. I think that might have been me. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. So delighted to be with all of you tonight, in the middle of the night. Some of you are awake in Europe to see Susan. We are here to talk about, well, there were so many things that we could talk about with Susan. So we're going to try to stay focused on trauma healing and nonviolent communication. So the very first thing that I would like to ask Susan is, how did you get started with the trauma healing?
Okay. I'd like to go way back to answer that question. I remember with an amazing level of clarity a moment when I was a senior in high school. I was walking down the steps to our basement, and all of a sudden I had this almost full body experience that some of the boys in my class were going to die in fighting in wars. And I wept. And that, I think, started my first moment of maybe puzzlement, maybe even bewilderment. Why do we humans kill each other to solve problems? And so I think that's been an underlay for me from that time forward. I don't want to give you my whole biography because we would never make it in an hour and a half. But if we fast forward a little in my life, over some decades, it became clear to me that this planet consists of groups of people with different levels of consciousness. Groups of people with different levels of consciousness. What does that mean? Similar to embryos, embryos have different levels of development. They're neither good nor bad. They're necessary. It's a progression. But these groups, when we look at it globally, many of them hold different value systems, one to another. And there's overlap in places. But the overriding modality, the paradigm that has governed this planet as long back as I have, as written records go, has been that of better, worse, right, wrong, superior, inferior, stronger, weaker, oppressor, oppressed. And that is an overlay that has just literally programmed, I think, all of our brains. And so the first point, I guess, that I wanted really to make is that we need to find ways even when values differ and people are on different developmental paths, you can't just say to somebody who's learning to walk, I want you to run in the Boston Marathon. And we have to honor each of these stages of development, even if our development is a little further forward. So finding a way to peacefully coexist with caring between groups is really, in my reality, the only formula for this planet allowing all groups to thrive. If your group is growing and thriving, my group can grow and thrive. So that was the overall context. Now that functions on a global level between countries. It functions on a national level within countries. It functions in relationships, you, I to another person. And it also functions me to myself, your relationship to yourself. So how does this further apply? So most people, when they say the word I, they think of themselves as that I. My reality is that we have more than one part that we identify within ourselves. Many people have all bunches of different parts. And those parts, if they are not working together, if they seem to hold different values or behave in ways that we don't enjoy in any given moment, this is part of the task, I think, of shifting to a life-affirming paradigm in which all parts need to be nourished. And that forms the basic paradigm for nonviolent communication, a life-giving paradigm. So I'm just going to pause for a minute to collect my thoughts and let you kind of sift through what I've said so far. So if each of us finds ourselves basically with the same problem internally as the world faces externally, then we need to regard this both as, well, let me speak personally. For me, this was both a mission, a purpose in life, but also a personal challenge to me. I mean, I became aware very much at the beginning, and I'll go there in a second with the transition into nonviolent communication. But every time I became cognitively aware of a way that I could grow, I also encountered all those parts of myself that weren't kind of cooperating. So that's a little I want to talk about what the role of trauma is in that happening. So we are basically have a conscious mind. Most people are pretty connected to what they think consciously, but we also have emotional realities that comprise can comprise a completely alternative point of view to what your conscious mind is thinking. And that comes about often because in our early years, we are not being supported and cushioned with an empathic space in which the natural development is one of joy and playing and the free exchange of nurturing energies in a variety of forms. When that doesn't happen, and when indeed the opposite happens, where children feel unseen, unknown, like, how did I get here? Am I on the wrong planet? Then the stress that brings to the nervous system leads our neurological system. And I'm not going to try to describe this in a technical sense. I just want the dynamics of it. Your neurological system will do what it needs to do to survive, whether that's develop a flight pattern, an avoidance pattern, whether that develops in certain situations, a fight back pattern, I'll stand up for myself because I'm the only one who's going to, or when it gets completely knocked back and overwhelmed, we develop that dorsal freeze response where we're confused at best, perplexed, moving into actual not being able to think well enough to even formulate words, to then the most extreme level of dissociation. So this has happened to so many of us. And then along comes Marshall Rosenberg and nonviolent communication. And Sarah did ask me how did I encounter it? Well, I encountered it. Some of you may have heard this before if you've been in workshops with me, but I came from a family that did nothing but fight every single day. Between my parents, between me and my sisters, it was constant. And I was in the car with my youngest sister, who's the only one that I had any hope of really bonding with. And yet she and I were having trouble in our relationship. And she was highly explosive. If I said the wrong thing, it was all over at a level of screaming. So I said the wrong thing. And then I knew it instantly. And I was driving, and I just remember tensing up at the wheel, waiting for her to blow. And she turned to me and she said, "Are you really just so much would like and tried so hard to get connected with your sister?" And I'm like, what was that? But it landed. She did it really well. And I went, yeah. And so without giving you the whole blow by blow, the rest of that, at the end of that conversation, she and I felt closer, I think, than we had in years and years. And I turned to her and I said, "What the was that?" And she said she'd been to this workshop with Marshall Rosenberg. And that's how I got involved. And at that time, Marshall was coming. I was in LA, and Marshall was coming to Southern California very frequently because that's where everybody in NVC, there were no trainers on the East Coast. There were no trainers in any other country. It was all pretty much
What year was that? Approximately early 90s,
70.
Oh, it was 70.
Maybe 70. I was still at UCLA, so 70, 72, somewhere in there. I have to think about that. My chronology is not great.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So where were we?
So
Marshall.
there you were.
Yeah.
Going to San Diego.
So a few days later, she left me a voice message saying, "He's going to give a free workshop in Santa Barbara. You should go." So I went, and that was the beginning. So for the first year or so, every time Marshall was there, I would just go to where he was, and I would sit there. And at first, it was taking in the concepts, and then it was like, what's the right wording? It is literally you're learning a new language with MVC. Not only is there the shift of energy from a system that's based on who's right, who's wrong, who can we blame, who can we shame, or how can I make me feel guilty? And if not me, how can I make somebody else feel guilty? That is so deeply breathed in as we evolve that a commitment to shifting paradigms in my reality, it's a lifetime. It's a lifetime's work. And so I guess I think sometimes when I was teaching at the beginning level and people said, "Oh yeah, I've been doing it for 2 years. I know NVC." There's a part of me that inwardly rolls my eyes and says, "I don't think so." I mean, I still, whenever I'm conscious of it, I'm still very much in process. So that's how I got involved. Now,
well, you said that at the time that you got involved, you were already doing some work with people. You were already doing some work with clients.
No.
What kind of work were you doing with clients, and how did it change when you met Nonviolent Communication?
Yeah. Well, I have gotten into doing one-on-one private work, kind of completely through a back door. I never set out to do that. But in the 70s, I met somebody who introduced me to the metaphysics of spirituality, meditation, breath work. And I just resonated with a lot of those ideas. And at a certain point, I just took a chance and started teaching. And once I started teaching, the next thing that happened, also completely unplanned, was that people would come up to me and say, I'd like to talk to you privately about my stuff in this regard. And that's how it all started. So that went on along for about 15 more years before I ever heard of Marshall. But along the way, in working with people, it just became increasingly clear to me that you'd be tracking something, then all of a sudden something would happen, and I would see a different reality sitting across from me, different body movement, different voice tone, like a different person. And I guess, luckily for me, this is no big to my credit, it's just I was born this way. I was able to work with that instantly. So if it was suddenly, I could feel it was suddenly like a very young energy. So I'd start talking to that person like I was talking to a young kid. And all of a sudden, I found that we evolved these dialogues back and forth, and that I was talking to somebody who was in a completely different emotional reality than they are in their normal, everyday, regulated world. And that worked amazingly well. So, for example, I had a client one day who was so stabbing herself verbally all the time. And I could feel her anger. And so finally, I just took a chance and just jumped in, and I reflected her anger back. I said, it sounds like, but I don't remember the content. And it was like, yeah. And all of a sudden, we had this incredible dynamic going back and forth. She had never recognized that she even had that part of her. Mm-hmm. So I had that type of experience over and over again. What happened when I met Marshall was, I think, nonviolent communication gave me the language skills to verbalize a life-serving paradigm. In other words, I want to talk a little bit more about what the hell is a life-serving paradigm anyway. But it gave me the actual words, and Sarah and I were saying a little while before we started here, I literally, by the third and fourth and fifth time I was sitting listening to Marshall, and those of you who've heard Marshall, you'll know at a certain point he became very repetitive. So I was listening to the same material over and over again. And that was a good thing. That really helped me, because then I didn't have to worry by the fifth time. I'm not trying to learn new concepts. I'm going, what words did he use? I'm writing exact quotations and then going home and underlining them in yellow and then practicing saying them. And some of them sounded a bit weird when I first started. Now, all these years later, they've become really an integrated part of my language, so they don't sound very weird to me at all anymore. Yeah. So that's that piece. So what is should we go to
so when you were working in your client work, there you were, you had been already working with people's parts with the sense that you may have already had a sense that trauma fractured people, and that the work that you did moved them back towards some kind of wholeness. Yeah.
Well, I didn't have the word trauma in my brain at that point. I mean, you have to understand, until the late 90s, and then only a very few people were at all aware of trauma and trauma work in the way that we have come to understand it. And I think we're still pretty much at the beginning of deeply understanding all of it. So I wasn't thinking of it in terms of trauma. I was just thinking of it in terms of different personalities, sort of,
Mm.
you know, I mean, multiple personality disorder, which is now has a politically different name, but the only difference there is in that when you have that condition, you don't remember the other parts.
Right.
But I'm talking about where we actually know, for example, you went to an NVC workshop and you're embracing you want so much to do a better job with your kids, say, than your parents did with yourself. And then all of a sudden something happens at home and you snap and you do something that you deeply regret, or you blame yourself, you feel guilty or whatever. That's the type of thing that we're dealing with when there are other parts of us that were born out of neglect and unmet needs and isolation and lack of kindness, lack of support. And we become angry, or we become self-denigrating, that we're not worth it, that we believe in spirit. Everybody else has spirit except me. You know, spirit made everything, except when it came to me, it went around me and skipped me. This is very common kind of belief. So, so yeah, in the 90s, I don't even remember what the first thing was, but I just started reading books. Bruce Perry was one of the first, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. And I started to understand a little more about the physiology of trauma. So I don't want this conversation, simply because we don't have time, to be a technical description of trauma. But let me just say this. A layperson's perhaps description of trauma would be something happens to someone, and decades later, there is still a negative consequence that's going on in that person's nervous system that is a result of that early experience, but they don't have one clue that happened. And so they don't understand, why did I suddenly scream at my kid when I'm trying to be such a spiritual person? And that's painful for people. So part of this path, I think, is not just learning to connect with other people, but learning how to connect with yourself when you are less than what you want to be. Those are hard places. They are hard places to face. They are hard places, I think, to acknowledge, and to be able to build a one-to-one relationship with your own self that is truly based on compassion, I think is actually the foundation stone of all stable transformative work. Yeah. So just to continue, I'm sorry, there are so many threads of this. I hope I'm not getting people muddled, but the next piece, I guess, that I wanted to address is what happens with trauma is the activation happens if it's high up in the spectrum of activation. It happens in your brain in less than a second. You can't really manage that in the beginning because it's too fast. So all of a sudden you're thrown into this other reality. And what is this other reality? This other reality is a reality that occurred, or not occurred, it's a reality which got put in place in order to help you survive a situation in which your nervous system was literally frightened or terrified, at some level feeling threatened in your very existence. What I call an existential threat. And that happens to children very frequently. And it's completely overwhelming. And so the nervous system will puzzle its way through either with fight-flight reactions, or then worst case scenario starts to go into the dorsal vagal progression, which I mentioned earlier. And so 40 years later, when you snap, that's what's happening. You're snapping back. Your brain just received a signal that registered like, this is a threat to my survival, like then, but it's not conscious. Therefore, you have no control over it at that moment. And that's what's happening with trauma. And it takes you right out of whatever your cognitive value system is into basically the survival value system of maybe a 2-year-old, maybe a 5-year-old, maybe a 15-year-old. And there isn't just one part. I mean, most people that I work with, they have early young parts, they have prepubescent parts, they have teen parts. And in their adult personality, they also have parts. They have adventure parts that sometimes never get the adventures that they need. They may have artistic parts that don't get expressed, musical, painting, sculpture, whatever. All of which is quite fascinating, but not all of them are traumatized. They're all just natural parts of a person. And people tend to experience well-being when a majority of their parts are getting to play, like you're not just stuck in one part of your reality and then all these other parts are going, wow, why don't I ever get a chance, to do my thing? So this is something I could talk about on its own for, 2 hours at least. So this is, I think, the point I'm trying to make here. Standard therapy has been fairly slow to integrate neuroscience, in my opinion. Nonviolent communication, I tried, and then when my pal Sarah came along and matured into the brilliant thing she is today, she tried, we tried to bring an understanding of trauma into the nonviolent communities around the world. And I will just bluntly say we failed. We failed. Now, this came for me after years of being privy to NVC-based communities getting into hostilities amongst themselves and unable to resolve them all over the world. All over the world. And I'm going, what's going on here? Nonviolent communication is brilliant. Why are these people not able to apply it? And the simple answer is early unintegrated trauma. They're getting reactivated and going into these survival patterns that were set up. And, and that is causing dissonance and disconnection in NVC all over the world. And so sadly enough, that was never really recognized at any central level where it was addressed. And when I tried to set up intensive training to deal with this, and even invited all trainers in the world to come at half price, maybe 10, 12 over the years attended, and there just wasn't interest. It wasn't real for them. So that's one of the great disappointments of my life, that I was really unable to successfully make that real enough that it could be integrated into our beautiful NVC skills. So I want to say another thing. So standard therapy has an approach to therapeutic work that is basically it's basically a fix it. You have a problem, it's not functioning right, there's something wrong, we have to fix it. One or another versions of that. And I don't subscribe any longer to that approach. What I really love now is, and it was crystallized by reading some of Bruce Eckert's work. He is the person who put together a healing approach called coherence therapy. And he's saying, whatever your emotional reality is, it's an emotional truth that is existent for a reason. There is a coherent reason that you screamed at your child. There is a coherent reason that you're paralyzed, say, to talk in public. It makes perfect sense at some level that you're doing this. So instead of approaching it from, there's something wrong with me that has to be fixed, it's a discovery of an unconscious reality that we haven't been in touch with, that's trying to keep you alive in its reality. And when you enter its reality, it makes perfect sense. And when you do that without blame or shame or trying to force yourself to grow or develop or change or whatever words you want to put on that, the brain has a system to update. So if you think of the brain or parts of the brain as a biocomputer, it's living, but it also has, different levels of understanding. And it's like if you were using your computer now with the system that was installed when you were 7, how well would your computer be working? So we're talking about basically upgrading our brains and allowing the old emotional reality, which made perfect sense then, all the behaviors and the reactivity and all those things, whether it's anger, whether it's avoidance and flight, or whether it's paralysis and bewilderment and confusion, all of those things were for our benefit. And I have moments sometimes in sessions with people where they talk about, that level of survival. And I say, good job. Good job. Good for you. Well, brilliant little kid. You got through it. It turns into a celebration if the person is able to empathize with a 4-year-old who's terrified and whose nervous system is adopting a certain response just to get through it, whether it's to block it out, whether it's to fight back, whether it's to run away from it. So that's what I love about coherence therapy, is it allows it's not a different thing. It's a system that you can approach just like NVC you use in any system, any other system, you bring that into the system. Same thing with coherence therapy. It just adds a level of allowing us to lovingly uncover these other emotional realities, and then without pressure, allowing the brain to update its system. It's like,
no, I knew you when you discovered Bruce Eckert and coherence therapy. And you were already doing it before you read his book. And you were like, here it is. Here's somebody who's done the science.
Yeah.
And is providing the background for what I already do.
But the brilliant thing about Eckert, if you read his book on emotional, I forget the exact title, but it might be emotional feeling therapy or something like that. At any rate, one of the things that really crystallized for me is you cannot upgrade or integrate trauma in your brain by talking about it.
Yeah.
That's why talk therapy is so ineffective. Not, by the way, I don't want you to hear that it's wrong or bad. It isn't. And many therapists are wonderful people, and just talking is helpful to be with somebody who's kind and understanding. But in terms of integrating, resolving trauma, talking about it, you could know exactly what the trauma is. It won't change a damn thing. The prerequisite for shifting and integrating trauma is that you have to have the brain of the person activated in that traumatic neural pathway as you're working with them. Then the neurons actually reconnect and activate. The pathway is open and new information can be taken in at that moment and registered. So that's one of the things that Eckhart makes really, really clear if you read his book. And that's what I think somehow a gift in my life was that I intuitively was able, when I was working with someone, to hear when those activations happened, even though my brain didn't early on understand exactly what was going on there. I knew that was what I needed to work with. And yeah, so I mean, did that answer that question?
So the two things for me that you brought that nobody else brought that were so that then you created a partnership with Robert Gonzalez and pursued for some time, but initially this sense of bringing neuroscience to help people understand how NVC worked was something that no one else had done.
Mm-hmm.
That was your gift to us. And then the second thing was a discovery that you made about needs energies.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, because I think that is another big piece. And that's what I alluded to a little ways back when I said I wanted to talk more about what is a life enhancing paradigm. Yeah. So to just jump in here, the words, many of you who have been around us before, you know, we use this phrase, the living energy of needs. And that is not a metaphor, that's a reality, that there is an energetic level that lives in the world of spirit, or whatever you want to call it, that we can tune into at any time, that we can enter that reality, even if it's not happening in our lives in a concrete way. So, for example, when I hear people who are learning NVC constantly use the word need, oh, you have a need for this, oh, you have a need for that, you have a need for this, I want to scream. After a while, I just want to scream, because it's devoid of life. It's not the word that carries the life, it's the life within you that carries the life. So if you are empathizing with somebody else and the need is warmth and affection, say, then it becomes resonant when your nervous system is actually resonating with it as you say it. And then it becomes life enhancing for the person. You're connected, they can hear it, they can connect. So this is what I came to be called the living energy of needs, because in my life, on a personal level, my prince never showed up, and I never ended up in a one-on-one relationship of the kind that I had dreamed about as a little girl and a teenager. And I had to come to terms with that. And there were years in my life when I was much younger where I thought I couldn't survive without a man, without a marriage. And at some point, I really got it that I could resonate with that energy of love and connection. I could do it right this minute. I can go there. I can feel the beauty of that. I can feel the fullness of that, the glory of that, and I can bathe my nervous system in it. And that is what I came to call. And it turned out Robert, and I'm sure many of you knew Robert Gonzalez, Robert was working on a similar track. I think I made I gave it the name Living Energy of Needs, and many of you know for years we did trainings called the Living Energy of Needs. But that for me is what makes NVC live. And without that, NVC can become just a dead tool that irritates people. So I guess.
But then one of the things that you did working with trauma was to bring the living energy of needs into the trauma work.
Well, yeah, I mean, the living energy of needs is in all the work and any empathy. Were you thinking of something other than empathy?
I just want to do an aside. This is so what Susan breathes that she doesn't even know that it was an earth-shaking discovery.
Oh.
Oh, that.
I see.
Yeah. What was it like? Do you even remember the first time you were doing what you call parts work and you started to bring the living energy of needs into session work? Do you even remember the first time? It's been your.
I do not remember.
I would imagine you don't.
I don't remember.
Now that I'm talking about it, do you understand that it's spectacular?
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
I think that's what I was referring to as my gift.
Yes.
I don't know why. I mean, it's just, I don't have it for superficial conversations, but if somebody drops into the depths of their of what's so for them, I'm there. I listen. I can feel it, and it just, I think I reflected. I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I might have loosely understood that I was being empathic, but I certainly didn't have the finely tuned understanding I think that I have now. I think it just happened. I don't remember learning it. I don't remember reading about it. It just was there.
Yeah.
And then where the living energy of needs and the analysis came in was I was leading an MVC support groups when I lived in the Minnesota area, and some member of our group came up to me and he said, "Why can't I do what you do? Why can't I do it?" He was so frustrated. And I'm like, what is it that I do? You know, and that got me thinking, and more, it got me observing myself. What is the heck do I do? And the first thing I realized was, if I'm listening to you talk, then I'm not listening in up here. If the entry point is in my abdomen, I feel the energy first.
And she's touching below her belly button.
Yeah,
guys.
I'm touching my whole abdomen, which is substantial. And then it comes up like and translates into linguistics and in that part of in the language part of my brain. So yeah, I mean, so then I realized it was resonance. So I'm picking up an energetic flow from the other person. I can tune into that and feel it, and I have the verbal skills to name it. And it's that combination. So if I say, if you just really, really want somebody who absolutely gets where you're at, I'm like feeling that when I say it. So it resonates with people. Or if you say, "Are you needing understanding? Are you needing support?" Even that was too much empathy, that last one. So that's what I think I was so excited to be able to share with people. So I went back to him and I said, "This is what I'm doing. So maybe you could take it apart and maybe that will be helpful in building the skills for himself." Yeah. So thank you for that.
So there you were. You stumbled across Robert in a training with Marshall?
No. So this is a sad story. In most of the 90s, I was an IIT trainer, so going to the intensive trainings, I loved them. And that's when I was starting to get into neuroscience. And I would go to these trainings and nobody was talking about neuroscience. Nobody was talking about trauma. So I started, occasionally we had the opportunity to pick a subject that we wanted to talk about. And I started putting those up as subjects. I started getting more and more people were coming to these. I mean, the interest level was huge. And so, so anyway, that was happening. Then fast forward, a whole bunch of stuff happened with Marshall, and he basically kicked me out and blackballed me as an IIT trainer. And I was bereft. I was deeply upset by that because those trainings, in a way, were the first real experiences I had of what it feels like to be in a family. I never had family reality as a child, and I never had a family of my own. And I loved deeply the IITs because it gave me that level of connection with people. And all of a sudden, I was no longer being selected as a trainer. And not for lack of being a successful trainer either. That's a whole nother story. So I was sitting around feeling really sorry for myself for a couple of years. And then somebody said to me, somebody gave me basically a kick in the ass and said, in effect, why stop feeling sorry for yourself and do something about it. And it was like, wow, okay, I think I really needed that. And what happened then was I got this idea to set up a training institute where all the things that we've been talking about could be talked about and integrated with NVC. And that got me so excited that I called up Wes Taylor, with whom I was good friends, another trainer, and said, I want to do this. Are you interested? And he was. And then he said, who else are you thinking about? And I said, well, I thought 2 men, 2 women. So Tove Wheatstrand, Swedish trainer and friend of mine, she was in as another woman, and he suggested Robert. Now, I had heard of Robert by name only. I had never even met him at that point. And so Robert became our 4th trainer, and that's how he and I originally connected. And then it turned out that Robert and I worked on similar pathways to some extent, not completely, but large extent.
Yeah, that you both had a sense of the reverberation of
That's the resonant
energies.
Yeah, the living energy of it, the role that plays. Yeah, we both had a very strong awareness of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a sad story because that in training
Well,
institute dissolved.
No, it was a sad story because I still wish I could be at the IITs sometimes, and also because it marked the end of my active relationship after 10 or 11 years with Marshall. So that had a lot of sadness for me.
And then at that point, approximately, that was when you did the International Women's Retreat in Mexico. Yeah, and we had Tove Wheatstrand there. Yeah. And that was where I met you. Yeah. And then you started, and that was right when you had conceived of the idea of New Depths.
Right. Yeah. And I still think that the New Depths program was like my baby. And I'm glad it lasted for a few years, and I'm glad Sarah joined me in it. But we could never really get the support from the network. So we couldn't continue financially with that. But it was such a beautiful program. And we have some graduates from our New Depths program here on the call with us. So just a shout out to you beloved people. Yeah. So I'm wondering, so I'd like you now, if you're willing, I would like to leave about 15 minutes for questions and answers, but I'd like to have you talk to us about the story that I find so important still, about your public speaking. Oh, my own trauma. Yes. And how, one of them. Because you've always said my trauma and my work go, my own healing work, because I walked this path myself. Yeah. I'd be happy to. So here are some facts. I was terrified to speak in a group, not just in like public event, but in any group, like a class. I went through 4 years at Bryn Mawr College. I never spoke in a class, not once. I got to Yale graduate school and my number got called because I was in a graduate colloquium where you were required to read a paper. There were 12 students and one world famous professor whom I greatly admired. And when it came time for me to read my paper, so you have to imagine this, it's a long table, 6 students on each side, my professor at the far end and me at the other end. And I picked up the paper, it was all written, all I had to do was read the words. And I had a massive attack of what we now know as PSD, post-traumatic disorder. But at that time was not even a phrase. Nobody had that language. And my face got hot. I lost all the saliva in my mouth. My eyes blurred. My head started doing, I don't know if you can see it, shaking like this, uncontrollably. And by some miracle, that group of people did the only thing I think that would ever have worked. They did it, which is they didn't do anything. They sat with me. They sat silently with me, probably for 4, 5, 6 minutes, a long time. Until finally, you know, I got enough of my eyesight back that I could actually see the words on the paper and started croaking out sentences and managed to actually read that paper. And subsequently, I just kept pushing myself. Well, I'll skip you. Okay, so fast forward, the next thing I know, I get invited to create a class for women at UCLA. So I'm thinking, oh yeah, okay, well, maybe it'll be like a consciousness raising group, 7 or 8 women will show up and that's fine. We just share. 96 people signed up. And they put me in one of those massive lecture halls like you see in the movies. I was petrified. My whole thing about, like, I knew I was just going to go up there and freeze. Again, I wouldn't be able to talk. And I did what I had learned to do that got me through the first class, which was I basically said, I, Susan, cannot do this, but infinite spirit can. And I literally turned it over. And then I went and started croaking out words. And all of a sudden, I got the excitement because I was passionate about women's role. This is 1972. The women's movement was just getting underway. And, you know, I was there with this whole class of, you know, statistics on no women in the Congress, no women in medicine, no women in law, no women anywhere. And that was just the beginning of the story. So once I let go and I could feel that passion, then I was able to really be present, and it turned out to be an incredibly successful class. Okay, those are 2 real incidents. Fast further forward, I'm talking with my father, with whom I was not close, but every once in a blue moon, we had a conversation on the phone. And in this particular conversation, he starts hemming and hawing on the phone, like, and finally I said, what the hell? Just tell me what it is you're trying to say. And he told me the following. When I was 3.5 or 4 years old, he was a school principal. He had a meeting of his colleagues at his home, at our home. My father had very low self-esteem. He was a very frightened man and very, very concerned about what other people thought about him. And apparently what happened was this little 3.5, 4-year-old, whatever, kept prancing into the room and dancing around all his colleagues. And in my father's reality, I guess, disrupting the meeting. And he kept sending me out of the room. And apparently I was undaunted in my desire to dance and play and connect with these people in some little girl space. And I kept coming back. And so he was feeling apparently increasingly shamed and embarrassed that he could not control his little child. And he yanked me out of the room, and these are his words, and he walloped me in the face. And then he went back to the meeting. Meeting was over, he closed up the house, went upstairs, went to sleep, and they found me in a puddle of blood the next morning on the kitchen floor, where I had apparently spent the entire night. And that happened to me, and I had no memory of it, none whatsoever, except that whenever I was called upon to speak in front of other people, especially people that I wanted to like me, that I admired and I liked, was interested in them, and I wanted them to be there with me, guess what would happen? My head would start going. That shaking in my head, because that's where I'd been walloped in the head. And it was suddenly all fell into place. And I went, oh my God, that's what this has been about all these years. So that actually brings us to the self, I've been fiddling with the word healing, self-healing. There's something about healing I don't quite like the word, because it somehow maybe implies that you've been sick. It's more, I think, for me, self-reclaiming, like reclaiming the self that always was, the who I really am, the who you really are, without the layers of pain and fear and suffering and all the other stuff that we humans endure on top. And so that process, and now we're back to my little pyramid where I said, yeah, it's global, country to country, it's national, it's interpersonal, but the rock bottom foundation is you to you. You being able to connect with yourself with a real open heart, where you have space for understanding things that you do that weren't what you really wanted to do, where you can bring that same quality of care to your own inner work that we try to bring to others. And everybody, most people that I've talked to in the MVC network anyway, seem to agree that the hardest thing that people have real trouble with is self-empathy, actually being there for yourself. So this is like me wanting to bring this home to those of you for whom this might be new, and maybe just enjoy hearing it again for those of you who are already familiar with this, these thoughts and this kind of work. That without that, there's no way for you to thrive. And without you thriving, there's really no way for you to build secure relationships. And without a base of secure relationships in our culture, there's no way we can start interacting with other groups. And it's just so clear to me that for me to survive, you need to survive. We need to thrive together, and groups need to thrive with one another, even when they embrace different values. And that's not an easy thing to do, but unless you recognize it as the goal, then we're not even on the path, let alone whether it's a hard path or an easy path. Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Yeah. I've been thinking about sort of the extraordinary contributions that Susan has made to us. And I would like to ask you to speak for just a moment about, it's really something that many therapists do, but you were the first one that I know of who combined neuroscience and time travel. But then not only did you just combine neuroscience and time travel, you did something no one else has done that I know of. I mean, those of us who study you and follow your work do, but to bring the living energy of needs into that process, just for people who've never, this was a life-changing experience for many people who got to be in a demo with Susan and experience Susan's support. But I wonder if you'd say a few words just kind of about the process, about your thinking about it, whatever you'd like to say to describe it a little bit.
The processes of combining neuroscience with NVC with the living energy of needs.
With time, but yeah, but I mean, that time travel piece.
This is just going back to something that, again, it happened naturally. I didn't plot it out, and I, only in hindsight can I recognize where this piece came and this piece came. Because basically, I've never believed there's only one system that works. So I'm eclectic. If this works, I'll try it out. And if it doesn't work on this person, then it might work on another person. So the first piece was picking up on those things that I said earlier. When somebody's energy shifts in a session, all of a sudden you realize you're not talking to an adult anymore. You're talking to a child. So that was bringing in the parts work. And then there was the time travel I rapidly learned that I learned it from them. They told me they were 5 years old. I didn't tell them access a 5-year-old. It was just the work we were doing triggered and opened up a painful pathway. And in that pathway, they slid into the traumatic memory. And then I was able to use my natural empathy to accompany them and to take a word that Sarah has brought in, so that they were no longer alone. And the implications when you open up a line like that with somebody, it's usually not a single incident. In my case, that particular pattern was one single incident created the whole thing the rest of my life. But for most people, childhood emotional neglect is not a single incident, and various forms of abuse, emotional or otherwise, is usually ongoing. So there's a whole stream of it. And then it just became very natural for me to stay with that. And what really happened when I started reading neuroscience is I would sometimes sit there and go, oh, but that's what I was doing. It's like neuroscience gave me the scientific framework that verified everything that I'd been doing. I was just like blown away.
So one of the things that you would do that was so beautiful is that you would, towards the end of the process, find an energy, a needs energy that was really important to the part that you were working with, and really resonate with that. And then after that resonance, you would invite this integration of self that was just such a beautiful quality in your work of inviting if it was a 5-year-old, inviting the 5-year-old to come back to present time, inviting the 12-year-old to come back, the 20-year-old to come back to present time, to be fully integrated and together.
Yeah. Well, this is something that goes back to some of what I learned from Dan Siegel about trauma integration being a state where instead of trying to make one part of you dominant, like your cognitive, prefrontal kind of cognitive adult self, you identify all the different energies that live within you. And and what you're going for ultimately is to free all those parts, update the parts that are no longer contributing to your life. They're no longer enhancing your life. So for example, we all often develop angry protector parts in our teen years. And they are perfectly understandable, totally coherent. And they are protecting, they're keeping their charges safe. But they're actually no longer needed. So the trick there is to appreciate, acknowledge, be so grateful, and then ask the protector part, like a simple question like, you must be exhausted. You've been working solid for 45, 55, 60 years. Wouldn't you like a rest? And if you've really connected, they very often go, oh, yeah, I am so tired. I am just so tired. And then I basically it varies with the person and how open they are to this, but it's like saying, well, we're not trying to get rid of you, by the way, we just like to rehire you for a new position. And you therefore integrate that part. And it doesn't have to be angry and protective and on guard all the time anymore. And so going back to what Dan Siegel was saying when he was acknowledging all these various parts that live within us, that basically you're trying to put together like a chorus or an orchestra. You don't want all your parts to be exactly the same. We like to have strings and wind instruments and plucking instruments and drumming instruments, and that all, when it's integrated in a way, it makes a beautiful, beautiful whole. And that's really what you're going for with trauma integration. Yeah. So
wonderful. Is there anything else that you had thought of before we began that you would love for us to
I was thinking about this last night, and I want to, I guess, acknowledge two things. One is I was back in a little bit of the vibration of fear, from that incident. It's like, well, the minute Sarah told me that several hundred people had signed up for this, it's like that little girl became active instantly. Oh my God, it's like, and I felt sad about that because for me, it's a celebration that Sarah has done this. I feel it right now in my heart. Her love for me is a very beautiful thing in my life. And then she would think to even set this up was like, and then here I am going, oh, I'm dreading this, So I sat and empathized with myself until I got into a really good place. And I thought if there was a moment when I could share that with you all, you see what an ongoing task this is. But I also want you to hear that it doesn't run my life. I didn't for 1 second think of saying no to this. I knew, I would probably have to deal with little Susie, but she would probably have some of those scary feelings. But that's okay. She and I are good pals and we know each other well. So that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to acknowledge is I think this has been this is my spiritual path. I was never good at joining up with any religion. I've always been curious, so I've gone to every church that I can get into and experienced their ceremonies and their sacred protocols. But nothing has ever called me like this idea of contributing to being part of and helping to enhance the life force on our planet. And I think you can all totally empathize with me and yourselves in this moment about how hard that's been, especially over these last several years with what's going on on our planet. It's just, it hasn't gotten easier. So I guess while I was thinking that, I just got this really excited thought that I wanted to say to all of you, that in addition to, still working with clients, I would like to augment my work with being available for anybody that feels called to this path, that's part of this family, all you guys and us, to mentor. I would like to support those of you that are working your way through this, who could use a session or 2 or 3 or 10 or 25, whatever it is, to get the kind of support that we really don't get and we desperately need. So I'm just kind of putting that out there because it excited me. It was a new thought for me. Even though I do that with a lot of people, it happens naturally. I've never really gone, someone saying I would like to be one of those people who you can turn to support, not just to do trauma work, but to follow this path. Like, what do I do when a part of me, how do I deal with this part of my life when I don't live up to my own expectations? That can be one of the hardest parts of this. And so many people, I believe, in the teaching world, and especially, please forgive me, any men out there, what I'm about to say, but especially in male spiritual teachers, there has been, in my experience, in the experience of many, many, many people that I've talked about, a level of what you might call hypocrisy, but my guess is that it's a fear of authenticity underneath of that, where spiritual leaders turn out to be a little more hollow than we had hoped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for those of you who are interested in session work with Susan, either to receive mentoring or to do the kind of trauma work that she's been describing, she can be reached at susanskye@gmail.com, and Jaya will put that into the chat. And we'll also send a follow-up note out to everybody who's registered for the call with some more information. One of the things we would love is to give Susan a little bit of a vacation fund, because she's dedicated her life to nonviolent communication and to giving us such beautiful healing possibilities. So we'll have information about that. We have a class that you can buy that will dedicate all the proceeds from that class sale to Susan, and have a little bit more information.
No way. This is the very first I have ever heard of this.
Jaya and I,
Sarah.
Jaya and I were yeah. So there Susan won't be teaching classes, but she's offering this, but there's session work that you can sign up for. So you'll be able to follow up with that.
Yeah. When I was pondering about today, sitting last night, and I thought of how many of you I probably have met and consider friends, and how heartwarming that is to me to have you out there, and how many of you I would love to meet. But basically, I was really thinking on the lines of the living energy of family, the living energy of family, which is so precious to me, that whenever I get a little sniff of it, I just feel wonderful. And Sarah gives me a lot of sniffs of that. So, yeah, thanks so much for your care.
So we'd love to open now for you to be able to ask Susan any questions you have, or to be able to speak directly to her. So you can raise your hand, raise your Zoom hand, and we'll call on you, or you can put your question in the chat and Susan will be able to read it and reply.
And if you have a question that feels private, you can send it to me and I'll ask anonymously for you.
Thank you, Jaya.
Where's the chat part?
The chat part's here. People have been writing in as we've been going.
Oh, I haven't been able to read any.
No, of course not. Kate, though, has a hand up.
Okay.
Kate, please.
Susan, so much of what you're saying about how you work with people sounds very resonant to me with internal family systems. And is it just that you're coming to similar places separately?
Yeah.
By them. How has it worked?
Yeah. Exactly what you said. I never ever had encountered. You have to understand something that I didn't say. I never took a psychology class in my life until the early 90s, when I went back to school and got a master's degree in counseling. So I had already been practicing for almost 20 years. So I had never heard of internal family systems when I was starting to do this parts work. And yes, you're quite correct. There is a definite overlap. And that's the beauty of it. So many of these parts exist in other places. The piece that almost all are missing, though, is the resonance of empathy. That, I think, is lacking in a lot of therapeutic settings, although it is there naturally in some. So yeah. So there's, as far as I understand, it doesn't contradict family systems at all.
Should we say hi to her?
Hmm?
How do we do that?
I didn't hear the question.
Hold on, we're getting somebody. Thank you, Kate. We'll take your hand down and we'll come to the next person.
Oh,
Looks like Holly, you have a hand up. Hi. Your camera has frozen, Holly. Holly got bumped off. There's a question here. Sonia writes, I have been moved to tears with the resonance and gratitude for what Susan shared. I have a question for her about EMDR as a trauma and PTSD therapy. I would like to know if Susan has had any experience with it, and if so, has she found it effective, particularly if combined with NVC?
and this is from Sonia.
Sonia, yeah.
Sonia, great question. I am familiar with EMDR. In fact, I am trained in EMDR. It has shown to be very effective with reducing trauma. I have used it, but not as much in recent years. But sometimes, as I said, I'm eclectic, and I even have, with some people, figured out how to do it over the telephone, because most of my practice now is over the phone since COVID. So yeah, it is a left-right brain stimulation while sitting with the traumatic reality. And I have yet to read an explanation of why it is sometimes as effective as it is. I don't think anyone yet totally understands in the way that we don't totally understand how the brain works yet. Yeah.
Yeah. Here's Laurel. Laurel, go ahead.
Yeah, years ago, Sarah, I did a workshop with you, and I was exposed to the idea of freeze, and was able to identify myself as a freeze and sometimes a flight person. And it was just so good to be reminded of the freeze, because often books, various kinds of self-growth books and psychology books, they say fight or flight, and
So that out, yeah.
Yeah, and so just following the discussion about EMDR, a lot of times I've been afraid to do the very things that might help me, like EMDR. Explored that and had a session, complimentary session with a EMDR specialist, and I was afraid to do it. There's fear of bringing up something that I can't control, and so it helped me be here today just to know that to have compassion for myself for my slow growth, because I'm wondering if freeze is a little bit higher is not the word I want, a little more challenging thing within a person than the fight or flight.
I think in a way it's more challenging because it's a little harder to access. In other words, the nervous system generally will not go into freeze unless it feels it's exhausted the other in other words, there's no possibility for fight, there's no possibility for flight. So the only option is to go to the dorsal part of the vagus nerve. So yeah, I think it can be a little more difficult to work with, but I mean, it yields. Once you start to understand it, it yields.
Yeah.
And there are versions of freeze that aren't a full freeze. Full freeze is pretty far along in that spectrum. I mean, the first things that start to happen is people start to disconnect, and they lose a little access to clear thinking, and the words may get a little confused, and then it might go to a full freeze. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's a perfectly good point, and I think that relates to something I've heard often from people, which is like, I don't want to do trauma work. What's the point of going through all that again? It's just like, they don't understand that empathy is not the same as re-traumatizing somebody. We don't re-traumatize people. We empathize with what's already there. And I have yet to experience in all these decades anybody where it got out of control or, got worse or was anything that they couldn't handle. But thank you for naming that, because that's fairly widespread.
You're welcome. That's helpful.
Thank you, Laurel.
You're
Now,
welcome.
we'll check in with Holly. Holly, you got back to us here.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I forget. Oh, Susan.
Yeah.
So are you basically not using NVC through that community much, but have integrated with your new discoveries and going forward with your own application of it with, as you said, I think the empathy piece or.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't make a conscious decision not to participate in NVC communities. As I said, I was basically disinvited from continuing at the IIT level. But as long as, for many years, I would get invited here or there to this or that NVC community.
And our new DEPS program was NVC.
But then as local areas started training their own trainers, and they had much less interest in bringing an outside trainer in. And then I put together the new DEPS training, which reflected my cutting edge understanding of what was going on, which does not happen in NVC trainings. So.
Well, I just wanted to thank you, because the transformation for me in the last, however long we've been on here, has gone from feeling nervous about this 3-hour drive and a gig on Sunday to do a wedding 3 hours away, and I got to do this, I got to do that, and it was like, just from being on this call with you and everyone, there's a voice in me that just said, I can rest. I can rest if I'm tired. I can sleep tonight. And also thank you for explaining, elucidating why every time I would get excited about NVC and I would start up again and I would read and I would listen and I would just try to do it. And it's like, this is just so effing clunky. This language is so clunky.
Yeah.
It's like dinosaur. And you explained it, that we have to connect, that it's really an inside job.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for getting it. That's really, really gratifying to hear.
Thank you so much, Holly. We loved talking with you. Luann, please. Oh, come off mute for us.
I just have a statement. I'm absolutely delighted and inspired to hear you describe your process of going through your trauma, the depths of it, in very important experiences where your backside was really on the line.
Yeah.
And how you made it through. I really love that part, because it seems like with this work, it's like trying to share it with other people and the anxious arrows of getting to that point. And also the other part that I really love is feeling it with through your abdomen. That is very deep for me. So that's all I had to say.
Well, thank you.
So grateful.
Thank you so much for saying it.
Yes.
Thank you, Luann.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Mary Ellen. Oops. Hold on a sec. Let me get Mary Ellen spotlight here first.
Hi, I'm here with Leslie. This is Leslie Williamson, and she's actually the one that has the question for you.
Well, it's not a question. I just wanted to say hi to Susan. I haven't seen you in 20 years.
Yeah, well, both of us.
Last time I saw you, we were at the university in Victoria.
Oh my God.
Right.
Right. That was a while back. Yeah. Yeah. Hi.
Hi. Well, I've carried on with NVC. That's primarily what I do for workshops. And I travel all throughout the grassroots communities with Indigenous people.
Oh,
Who,
wow.
as you know, well, I shouldn't assume you know, but they're very highly traumatized.
They're
From the
highly
circle
what?
of highly traumatized.
Oh, yes.
They're dealing with that
Absolutely. Yeah.
process, that energy,
Yeah.
that frequency all the time.
Have
So,
you done some of that work with Penny?
well, Penny's not well, you know. So
I know. I know.
I
Yeah.
did a 7-day thing on the island with her, but other than
Mm.
that, I haven't.
Mm.
But we both worked with Penny to become certified, so we're both kind
Yeah.
of Penny-ites.
Finally, we're certified, Susan.
Yeah.
Ah!
Yeah.
That's great.
But when she said
Carry on with that. That is wonderful work that you're doing.
it feeds my soul.
Yeah, I'm
Absolutely.
sure. I'm
Yeah.
sure. And it feeds their souls as well. That's the
Yeah.
beauty of it. Yeah.
You know, my mom's a survivor of the residential school system. So I don't know if you
Oh,
heard much
wow.
about that on the news, but
Mhm.
after they uncovered all those bones outside the school, you know, it's just been everything split open, everyone's hurting and acting it out. And they bring me in to do this work, but other work as well. So I love that you've tied it to trauma. I want to know more about it. Have you got a book on it now or something, Susan?
Oh, now you're really going to get me into my trauma.
Well, I just want to educate
I
myself.
wrote a book and it's dedicated to Susan.
Oh,
You have to read Sarah's book.
good enough. Good
You
enough.
know, it is one of the sadnesses of my life that I haven't gotten it together in a book form.
Yeah, me too. People are always asking me, you got a book? If you had a book, I'd read your book.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's a story for another day.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you, Leslie. Love.
Hey, I just want to say hi to Sylvie. I've been seeing.
Oh, hold on. Let me bring her up.
Oh.
So, thank you, Mary Ellen. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you. Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you.
And Sylvie.
Yes.
Hi,
I'm so happy to be here and
Yeah.
so grateful for Sarah and Jaya to have put this interview together.
Mhm.
And I'm delighted to have heard you say, I'm delighted, but also sad to have heard you say about the NVC community not having embraced your work with enthusiasm.
Mhm.
I share
They could even embrace it
that.
without enthusiasm. Embrace it. Well, that doesn't mean there aren't individuals like you.
Yeah.
For which I am very appreciative. And it's been lovely. Your face has been on the computer here all through this, so which is why I wanted to actually say directly hi.
Thank you. I send you a big hug.
Likewise.
Thank you. Thank you, Sylvie. And if there are any other New Depths graduates who would let Susan look at them up close, go ahead and raise your hands for us. We would love for you to be able to see, for her to see you.
Hi.
There's Colleen from New Depths too. You have to
Can
come
I
up.
speak okay?
There we are, yeah.
Okay.
Colleen, you look so different.
Oh, well, I've changed my hair, I guess.
Yeah. We've all changed our hair.
I like your hair. It just touched me deeply for you to bring me into new depths from the living energy of needs, and how much that first encounter I had with a method, you're supporting me through a really traumatic infancy, has released me to grow more and more. And every day I'm growing and finding more resonance and warmth in my everyday moment to moment existence. So I just want to thank you so very much. It's been a delight to know you.
Yeah. Well, it's a delight to hear you speak and see you now. I'm happy. I'm happy with you.
Yeah.
Mwah.
Thank you, Colleen. And Taria.
Oh, Taria's there.
Yeah.
Oh, there she is.
Yes, I've been getting notes of care for how I wept when this call started, just to be in the presence of both of you together, and the warmth and love that just radiates. I'm so grateful. I put in the chat, it's like a privilege to be in the presence of two goddesses of truth. Like the truth gets to come into my life in the form of both of you. It's just profound. And
Yeah.
I'm so happy to see you look so well and so beautiful, Susan. I think of you.
You look pretty cool yourself, Taria. Yeah, really glad to hear your voice.
Thank you so much, Taria. And next is Dan Miller. Dan Miller.
And we can't hear him.
He's coming off mute.
Okay.
There he is.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, Susan. Hello, Sarah. First of all, tears in my eyes of gratitude for how you've changed my life.
Mm-hmm.
Both of you, but Susan, you were the original connection for that.
Yeah.
And I finally found out what the magic was, is listen through my abdomen. I've been listening to every other body part I got. Not the abdomen, so thank you for that secret. I've been after this ever since I met you in the 90s. So it took me a long time to grab that. Sarah, that's going to change the entire resonant healing practitioner program forever. We're just listening through your abdomen. I love you.
Bye,
Thanks, Dan.
Nice to see you. Okay.
That's all right.
Now, Robin Collins, who is with us at New Depths too.
Hi.
Hey, Robin.
Gosh, you guys look great. Thank you so much for doing this, Sarah. It just really brought back so many really rich experiences of being with you two in New Depths, and hearing the juicy way that you talk about it, Susan. It's I've carried on with it too. So
that's great. That's great to know. Thanks. Thank you for that. Yeah. I mean, I want family members, so I want you to all join the family.
Okay. I'm in.
So my heart starves for that wonderful sense of these are my people,
Well, I am your people.
Yeah, not that we're better or worse than anybody else, but
there's a resonance.
Few of us.
It's like, oh, we can recognize that in one another.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, very much so.
Thank you for coming on, Robin.
Yeah.
Oh, my pleasure.
And now we have questions from folks who were not in New Depths. Hello to Nushin.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, Susan. My name is Nushin. And Sarah and Jay know I'm calling from Ann Arbor, Michigan. And the accent here, Iranian. I'm so sad that I had to just miss. I just made it to the last minute of the call, but I'm looking forward to see the recording. But I'm just here to just say that it brings me tears also that Sarah's work has been changing my life. And this is the only work that speaks to me, and it just goes really deep inside and bringing nourishment and healing. This is the only work that I've done. So many modalities and tools, and I really needed that. And you don't know that how much Sarah has been supporting from the background, how much she's been supporting me, and Joya too. Is like two holding hands. It's like, come on, you can do that. You got you. And I'm just so grateful to be in the community, in NBC community. But most of all, Sarah is the highlight for me. She knows that. I love you, Sarah. So I'm just so looking forward to the recording. I get to know you more, Susan.
Thank you, Nushin.
Thank you.
It is a different culture for me. It's like, I've been here for 32 years. It's totally, everything is so different, but then I'm coming to NVC community and coming to Sarah as if like I'm part of the family, I'm at home, and then I'm just, you know, the same culture. So,
Yeah. Well,
Thank you, Nisha.
Yeah.
And Alan, you walked away from your chair, but we have you here. Here, we'll come back to you. Deborah. Hi, Deborah. We'll come back to you, Alan, just a second.
Hi, Susan. Hi, Sarah. Susan,
That's Deborah. Oh, hi there.
we were together in Maine in 2007.
I remember. Yes.
Well, I don't know when you did the New Depths and when you were kicked out of the NVC circle, and how does that compare to 2007? I'm so curious about where I was in your timeline.
Uh-huh. Well, I wasn't kicked out of NVC. I was kicked out of being an IIT trainer at those
Right.
trainings.
So what
that happened in 2001, maybe.
Okay.
So
Anyway, you worked with Debbie, who is 5 years old.
yes.
And I can see us in that room, in that place in Maine, and you working with me. And so when I met Sarah many years later, and she said, my mentor was Susan Skye, I just had this huge feeling of, joy coming up from my abdomen. like a waterfall. Yeah, just so much joy in making this connection. The other thing I wanted to say was I was there with Teresa, who is my sister-in-law, and you helped her to claim how much she wanted to have a child. I don't know if you remember this.
I remember Teresa. Yeah.
She had a child, and I have a niece because of you. And I wanted to tell you that this human being would not be on this earth, I believe, if you hadn't helped Teresa really claim the depth of her desire to have a child.
No, that's beautiful.
She
I'm
worked.
very happy for her. Please send her and her baby, which is probably no longer a baby.
8 years old. She's
Yeah.
cousins with my granddaughter. So yeah.
Wonderful.
Oh, so grateful to you. I just
Good to see you, Deborah.
it's wonderful to see you. We're just
Yeah.
I'm part of your family.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. And Alan.
Hi, Alan.
Hello. Yeah, hello, Susan. Hello. I'm from Malaysia, and this is the first time I meet you. I'm actually okay. Like you say, I may have some trauma and public speaking or what, but now I'm quite nervous to speak in public, and yeah. But I quite resonate with your introduction.
Hearing this.
And I think I'm quite similar with Susan, that I'm coming from a fighting family, and yeah, perhaps I'm struggling now. I'm 40 over years old. I'm struggling now with my career, and I'm kind of like don't know what I really want. And yeah, when there's a hint come out, and then I try to pursue it, but then later on, I've gone through a lot of failure feelings, and yeah, so okay. Another question is how can I want to trust? I mean, I've been through some journey. Like I heard of NVC. I heard some trauma.
How can you
healing.
trust what? How can you trust? What was your question? How can you trust what?
Yeah, I feeling I've been to some church, or some teachers I came I came across, but then I just couldn't commit in some system, or for instance now I wanted uh, um, to know more of your teaching or your program, but it seems that unconsciously there are something that pulling back. This not going to work. This I'm going to fail again. Something like that. Yeah. So how can you how should I address the question? How can I throw myself in, or or what's the trauma that's holding me back?
Well, I really appreciate your sharing what you have said so far. I'm not sure that I can really address the underlying issues because we're actually over time already. But what I could suggest, Ellen, is Sarah, as you know, she gives classes regularly. And that might be, I mean, you work with people and talk to them.
Yes.
There would be some space and time for you to get some of the information that pertains to what you're wanting to know. So, yeah, I would say just hook up and I'm sure the path will unfold from there. Yeah.
Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And Catherine, we'll wind up. We'll take one more question or comment from Catherine, and then we'll say goodbye for today.
Hi, I just want to, I'm from Quebec and I study NVC for 4 years now. And I work with Julia Wright, that it's her who linked me with you, Susan. And I'm following you for a couple of months now. I'm not going to ask my question because we're over time, but I really want to thank you both as wonderful women that I honored and cherish. And thank you for the partage, for the transmission and le partage. I forgot the word right now, but I just want to present myself as Catherine and that I'm really happy I was part of this.
Well, it's really a pleasure to meet you, and I'm so happy that we're in the same family.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thank you, Jaya, for helping us with everything today. We're so grateful. And we love all of you. It's so wonderful to see you. If you would like to come off mute and say goodbye to Susan and tell her you love her if you want to, then please do.
Yeah. Love you, Susan.
Bye. We love you.
Thank you. Bye, Susan.